I'm Bertram Souza, veteran Mahoning Valley journalist and the host of the Scribbler podcast, welcoming you to a postmortem of this month's primary election in Ohio. Here's the overarching question for the general election campaign. What does Ohio U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown, a Democrat seeking a fourth six-year term, have to do to defeat Republican puppet master Donald Trump in November? To be sure, Brown isn't being challenged by Trump, who will be on the general election ballot nationally seeking another term as president. The Republican nominee for the U.S. Senate seat is Cleveland businessman Bernie Moreno, who is nothing more than a Trump puppet. Without Trump's endorsement in the primary, Moreno would not have defeated two others vying for the GOP nomination. So Brown, who has proven to be a very effective campaigner, must find a way of making sure that his base of support does not disintegrate as a result of Trump being on the ballot and also as a result of the former president endorsing Moreno. By any measure, this election will be Brown's most challenging in his long tenure as an elected office holder. The Trump factor cannot be underestimated. Indeed, the former president, who has a political stranglehold on Ohio and has turned it blood red from its traditional purple, knows he's king of the hill in the Buckeye State. So what can we expect in the next 7 months leading up to the November general election? Joining me to analyze the primary election and discuss the general are three veterans of Ohio politics: Dr. Bill Binning, Professor Emeritus of Youngstown State University's Political Science Department and a one-time Republican Party operative; Brent Larkin, retired director of the Cleveland Plain Dealer's editorial page, who still writes a Sunday column for the paper; and Tom Suddes, who covered politics for many years for the Plain Dealer and continues to write a column for the newspaper. Tom has a doctorate in journalism and is a part-time faculty member at Ohio University. All right, gentlemen. First of all, Bill, Brent, and Tom, thanks for joining me to talk about the recent primary election and the unfolding general election campaign. But let's begin with this, with your pre-primary predictions as to who would win the hotly contested Republican nomination for the U.S. Senate seat currently held by Democrat Sherrod Brown. Tom, you said Matt Dolan would win by a sliver.
Right.
Brent, you picked Bernie Moreno, as did I. And Bill, you picked Moreno in a reach out, but said you hoped Dolan would win. Yeah. So what happened? Because it wasn't a sliver. The numbers show that, in fact, Moreno got over 50% of the vote in a three-person race, which is very impressive. So, Tom, let's go with you first, since you were looking at the tea leaves or the poll numbers and thought there was a chance that Dolan would pull it out.
Well, I'm not embarrassed because I'm usually wrong anyway, so that helps matters a little bit. But what people that wanted to tell me that I was wrong, and many did, said they believed that I discounted the fact that Mr. Trump's endorsement was so all important to the Republican primary voters, and that by not fully giving that credit, I underestimated the kind of support that Moreno would get. I thought it was as interesting the fact that he won as that he carried all 88 counties, rather.
Right.
Which I thought was kind of remarkable. I noticed, by the way, that he did very, very well in Northeast Ohio.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly Mahoning and Trumbull. And that's very striking to me. But I don't know. The others on the panel will have a better sense of what happened than I did, obviously.
Brent, you...
Well, hindsight's 2020. Nope, I don't think any of the four of us thought that he was going to win by in actually a landslide.
Yep.
Trump's appearance in Dayton, and was it a Saturday before the election, clearly helped. It reinforced the notion that Trump was for him, which in Ohio with this party is pretty much all that matters. And that's not an exaggeration. That's in a multi-candidate primary, all you need is Donald Trump's endorsement, and you won't be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, and you will win. And Trump's late appearance in Ohio clearly helped, but he was going to win anyways. And this is just another election cycle where people have underestimated the strength, especially in Ohio, of what Trump's endorsement does for people.
Sure. Bill?
Well, I agree. I agree with the two other panelists on the weight of Trump. But I think the other thing that you need to consider is that even though the plain deal has been bashing polls, I think the polls had a big part in this, because the polls made it a hotly contested two-person race, and that's what the voters saw. And so they weren't, and so LaRose's vote just collapsed, and obviously most of that vote went to Marino. So I think the way the election was set up through the polling data, and that also, I think, misled DeWine into thinking that he could somehow give weight to this Dolan candidacy, because everybody thought the race was dead even close because of the poll numbers, and the poll, and then LaRose. I don't think the polls were wrong at the time they were done. I think what happened is that the voters perceived that voting LaRose was a wasted vote, and then I give weight to Trump's endorsement, and that's what happened.
Tom,
Bill, don't forget Trump. Excuse me. LaRose was not on television.
Right.
The final week of the campaign, and the other two were on incessantly. And he was off the air because he was out of money.
Yeah.
And that had to play a role also.
Yeah, and Tom, you obviously in doing your master's and then your PhD, I'm sure you've come across or done some kind of analysis on polling. When you have an individual like Donald Trump, just as we are familiar with, remember when Jim Trafficant used to run, and we used to poll him, and the polls would show the race a lot closer than what the ultimate result was. For a number of reasons, people didn't want to tell the truth about supporting Trump, and Trafficant and all of that. So with Trump being a factor, how much weight should we give to polling these days?
Well, again, the other two panelists genuinely know more about that than I do, although I had statistics and all that sort of stuff as part of my graduate work. I think that there's become an attitude, and maybe on the part of a lot of people that are polled, to kind of play games with the pollsters. And just because of being a smarty pants, I can tell them what they want to do and see what happens. I think that polling does work when it's done properly, with a lot of safeguards and so forth, and a lot of professionalization of the techniques and so forth. But I think also that maybe Ohioans, well, Americans anyway in general, feel over-polled and are deciding, in effect, to a kind of a little bit of passive regression by giving smarty pants answers, or answers they don't really believe in. That's all I can figure.
Right.
But can I say something
Go ahead,
about
please.
this notion that's popular to piss all over polling? Excuse my language, but
Yeah,
but
go ahead.
That's what your newspaper did.
yeah, but that's not my newspaper. They're wrong. Okay, in about 3 months or 4 months, they will be running they have a relationship with Baldwin Wallace, and they hype the hell out of it. And it's a plain dealer poll. And they were running stories about polls a week before the election, despite what you may have heard. And look, in last August and last November, on the two issue ones that were on the ballot in Ohio, the polls pretty much nailed the result.
They did.
So, and both the constitutional issue and then the abortion issue. So the notion that polls, we should never pay attention to polls, is just hogwash.
I was I pretended to be a pollster for the Vindicator.
Yes.
For quite a few cycles, and I wasn't too bad. But one of the things that I learned was polling in primaries is much more difficult than in a general
Yes.
election, because in a general election, the party gives structure to the result. So you don't have a lot of variability or change going on. But in this case, you have, as you pointed out, you have three candidates. Really, nobody really knew very much about any of them except what they saw on television or something. I mean, none of them were like established statewide political figures. And so there was really nothing to hold this poll together. And so it's not shocking that it kind of just didn't. As I said before, the polls could have been correct when they were first done, or as they were done over time, and it just I've already made my assertion that the polls created it as a two-person race. And as Brent points out, there was no advertising for a third candidate. But I don't have a big problem with polls. I just want to point out that when you don't have party labels and you have multiple candidates, there's a possibility of a lot of change occurring, especially when you don't have a dominant political figure in the field, which there was not.
Well, why did LaRose, who's been on the ballot before and has won, and even Dolan, who's got a good name, big name, why did they do so poorly? What went on here? Because if you watched Bernie Moreno's commercials, it was like Donald Trump was whispering in his ear, and he was spouting all of this Trumpism. What went on here, Brent?
What went on? Excuse me, Bertram. In terms of
the other two candidates doing so poorly, despite their name recognition and despite the fact that they were known in Ohio.
I think in the Rose's case, he got outspent about 3-1, I believe, and in Dolan's case, the result on last Tuesday was consistent with the result 2 years ago in the primary when he ran a distant, third or fourth? He got in the low 20%, and maybe there has been a connection with, Trump likes to say that he's been called a rhino. He's been criticized for the Indians' name change to the Guardians. For some reason, he doesn't connect with today's Republican voters. Matt Dolan is a candidate more in the tradition of Mike DeWine, George Winovich, Bob Taft. He is not a flamethrower. He doesn't say crazy stuff. And Bernie Moreno was willing to say or do anything to capture the heart of the Republican voters, and who are resentful and angry at the way life has treated them, sometimes legitimately, other times not.
Tom?
Well, I agree with Brent about his analysis of the circumstances. I think that maybe because I'm outside of the metropolitan area, I think there's more flame throwing going on than people think there is about the spirit inside Republican rank and file voters and so forth about political matters. And I think that Moreno was playing to that and got the result he wanted, which was nomination. That I don't think LaRose was the competitor for the longest time to begin with anyway, at least the last few weeks. And as for Mr. Dolan, I think in many ways, as I said, I expected him to win by a hair. I think that there's a reasonable case to be made for his having won or having been able to win. But I think we're talking not about reason, but about emotion here in these campaigns. And therefore, I think that it's understandable that maybe the trend or the outcome was in favor of Moreno. But I still wonder what it'll be like with his facing a seasoned candidate in the general election.
Right.
Because there is a heck of a difference between running 4 or 5 times statewide and running for the first time statewide. And that's what I'm curious about myself. But to answer your question, go ahead, I'm sorry.
We'll be talking about the general in a minute. Bill, if you were still in Ohio, I'm not going to tell people where you are, where you moved to. But if you were still in Ohio, would you be welcomed in today's Republican Party in Ohio?
Not unless I change my stripes, because of this Republican Party in Ohio, which is what I think it happened. I mean, that explains it. This is the Trump Party. Not only the persona of Trump, the ideas of Trump and the style of Trump have taken over the Ohio Republican Party, which is now a protectionist party. I mean, this is a party of the old Tafts that were the old Taft was protectionist anyway. But anyway, this it's a different party. And to answer your question, probably not, Bertram. I wouldn't be welcome. I mean, I think the Bush crowd has been pushed out. They're gone, and they're not welcome in the party. That's it. This is a different party. It's dominated by a different cast of characters, unless they change their stripes. I mean, there are some political characters still around that I knew, but are now ardent Trump supporters. So you could survive if you're an ardent Trump supporter. I don't happen to be an ardent Trump supporter, and so I would not be welcome in the party. And you can see what happened to them. They just stomp on you and drive you out.
Yeah, that's true. But Trump not only ensured Marino's victory, but he crushed Governor Mike DeWine and former Republican Senator Rob Portman in the process. They and their wives had endorsed Dolan, as did several major newspapers, including the Plain Dealer. What does the primary election outcome do to DeWine's and Portman's reputation? Long-time, politicians. Tom, let me start with you.
Well, reputations in Ohio evolve over time quite a bit, and you'll sometimes think when someone left office as a schnook, that he or she emerges 10 years later in the eyes of chroniclers as someone that was an ideal statesman for the times.
Okay.
I think reputation in terms of Senator Portman and Governor DeWine, both are unsettled in the sense that we won't know much till a few years after they're out of office. But for right now, if you're a political actor, you're seeing they don't seem to have the clout you might have thought they had, which weakens them, especially dealing with the legislature in the governor's case.
Right.
Legislature is not within any bounds of reason, a reasonable place to deal with right now. Senator Portman is comfortable in his own skin, I'm sure of that, no matter what happens now, because he doesn't have to go deal with political matters anymore, particularly. But I think, again, currently they've been weakened, but in the long run, it's hard to say what reputations will be. For example, just a quick aside, people that would have despised James A. Rhodes when he was in office, and sometimes now think, oh, that was Jim and this, that, and the other thing. People that despised John Gilligan when he was in office and first lost have seen him, I think, as a constructive figure in the state's politics. But right now, the governor and the Senator Portman are both in a weaker position than they were before they endorsed.
Brent?
Well, given what we spent the last 18 or 19 minutes here talking about why Ohio has changed, so given that, there's no reason for anyone to have expected that Portman and the Governor DeWine's endorsement would have changed, any more than 20 votes. And I mean that literally 20 votes. And why would endorsements are always a bit overrated. And in this particular race, DeWine won an extraordinarily impressive re-election win 2 years ago, but he has been disconnected from the mainstream of the Republican Party in Ohio now since he first won in 2018. And as for his reputation, my view of Mike DeWine has changed considerably over the last 5 years, notably because of House Bill 6. And his ties, which we always knew existed, to First Energy. And I think that is going to be a big part of his legacy, frankly.
Bill, was it
I agree with what's been said. I think in the short run, I think it was obvious before this, but it's certainly true going forward that they are irrelevant now in the 24 statewide election. Vote for president and the Senate seat, that you won't see either one of them on the stage with either Marino or with Trump going forward. So they have, and as Tom pointed out, DeWine very weak with most of the legislature anyway, so he's not going to be involved with any state legislative races either. So they're just going to be on the sidelines, and he's also lame duck, and so he's just going to be on the sidelines. That's not the same as his reputation. I mean, his reputation is what somebody writes in 10 or 20 years if they write a book about him, or the future columnists are make references to the demigods of Ohio politics. Whether I don't know whether DeWine will stand up to, let's say, Rhodes or Voinovich or Celeste as a major figure in 20th century, or at least the 21st century Ohio politics. I don't know if he'll make it. I do think he's tainted somewhat by First Energy, but that's not the only thing. He's just not, for a variety of reasons, he's not in control of his state's party, which has never been the case with most Ohio Republican governors or Democratic governors, for that matter.
Yeah.
And a lot of that's because of Trump.
Right. Why do the Democrats, especially those in Washington, believe that Marino was the weakest candidate to challenge Sherrod Brown? What are they seeing? And perhaps for those of you who are in the front lines, what are they seeing in this election that leads them to believe that? Tom?
I think that they're in Washington. That's why they think what they think. Not in Ohio. I think Democrats are a very closed group of people, politically and intellectually, that is to say, that have conceptions. And I think that it's something even I've had a hard time adjusting to. But I have to admit that Ohio has changed fundamentally in some important ways, more than outsiders think, I think, about the political environment here in the state. It may be that Moreno is vulnerable on a number of fronts, but on the other hand, he already was vulnerable on a number of those fronts and has got where he got anyway. Again, within a Republican context, I know. But I think that unless somehow there's a social issue wrapped into the Democratic campaign for the Senate, i.e. reproductive rights or something like that, that really mobilizes voters, I think that it's going to be an uphill battle for the senior senator from Ohio right now. And Washington, it's amazing. These outside consultants always know so much about Ohio and they never spend any time here realistically.
Right.
And get out of the cities, especially, which are mostly Democratic in the inner core, including Columbus and Cincinnati now. And I guess if I'd say if they're such geniuses, why are they in the situation they're in politically in general? And about politics in Ohio and outside Ohio right now. They've got a bad problem, I think, and we'll see how it plays out. But that's my take on it.
Brent?
I think they wanted to. Their preference was to run against Moreno because he had never been on the ballot in Ohio. As you know, LaRose has run statewide quite a few times now, and Dolan ran, at least in the primary 2 years ago. He was an unknown, and Tom has mentioned many times in the past the importance that Ohioans have historically placed on being on awarding someone a win the first time out. And he sold cars for a living and for many years. And I think there you can always find stories about disgruntled purchasers, and there is a mountain of a little pile of evidence building that he has been involved in some stuff that Sherrod can use against him in a general. And Dolan was more moderate. He would have been an easier sell, I think, with suburban women who tend to have a lot more sense when it comes to elections than suburban males. And they did not want to run against Matt Dolan. And I think Matt Dolan would have beaten Sherrod.
Bill, what's your sense?
I don't know. I don't know any more than the little bit I see in the press about Marino. I guess he had issues with paying employees. I think that's the primary issue right now, right? That other issue about him was a prankster issue. I think the press that's been accepted, where he joined some, but I think he did try to. There is some evidence he tried to screw over his employees. So whether they can build that up, I don't know. But the thing that I'm interested in is that the Republicans are beginning to nominate statewide candidates who've never run for office, any office. They haven't run for councilman. So we don't know if this gentleman has even the basic political instincts and sense of timing. He doesn't know anybody, and he probably doesn't know anybody. And he probably goes to Cincinnati, probably never met any of those people down there before. So it's very odd that, through most of my political career, the candidates, other than probably John Glenn, they had all been in office and run for office and have a lot of political experience and built up a lot of ties and networks the way Brown has. But these Republican candidates, like Marino, he doesn't have any. We don't know if he has any kind of political skills, and he has no legitimate contacts in the state. Does that still matter? I don't know. But this Vance won without any of that. In some ways, he was a rookie going around, and the Republicans are going to these kind of, partially because of Trump, they're going to these candidates who have no political experience or ties to the state to speak of. And so I think that's in itself is a liability. I mean, you're prone to make a simple mistake if you haven't been around a while. That's what I think. He's like you step on his tongue someplace or on some issue. And which will be,
I think we underestimate the role he played in this election. Also, he brought Don Jr. into Ohio many times. Talk about the village idiot, and he raised over $1 million for Marino, used through his Silicon Valley connections. And Vance is a player.
Vance a player, yeah.
Vance is, as far as I can tell, a really smart, dangerous, and that's what makes him so dangerous. I'm not sure Marino is as smart as Vance. And God, the day before the election, they were hanging out with Kari Lake. And I would have told you 2 years ago or 3 years ago, Kari Lake and Marino were going to spend the day before the election together before he won a big victory. You wouldn't have known who she was, correct? She's just, you got to take a shower when you're in the same room with these people. And now they have all this clout, but you have to run to the shower. And one of them might be the next vice president of the United States of America.
That's right. That's right.
And ironically, they are the faces of the new Republican Party.
Yes, they are.
They are. That's good. Now there's a powerful force in Ohio. Vance is a powerful force in Ohio.
Yes.
Yes, and you know what's frightening, Bill, about Vance is I do think he's real smart, and And that's what makes him dangerous.
Now, he has some really weird ideas, so
No,
Yes,
you
he
think?
does.
Yeah.
I mean, being smart's not always
Yeah,
being
yeah.
smart's not always the best thing.
Yeah, right.
In the introduction to this podcast, I contend that Sherrod Brown, who's seeking a fourth 6-year term, must find a way of overcoming Trump's stranglehold on Ohio politics, even though his opponent is Bernie Moreno, is actually running against Donald Trump. And that's my estimation of what's going, especially looking around what's going on in the Mahoning Valley. How does he do that? How does Sherrod, who's we all agree is a great campaigner, does very well on the stump, how does he overcome this Trump factor? Tom?
Well, I wish I knew, because being from Northeast Ohio, well, we all are actually. I wonder a lot about that. I have no idea. I think that the only thing that can happen is not the only thing. The main thing that can happen is for Sherrod to emphasize he's on the side of the little guy, the little gal, the blue collar worker, and so forth and so on. That he's very much a service-oriented legislator in terms of the constituent service and so forth. And so that he can bring home the bacon for Ohio. I can imagine them doing lots of spots, not in Northeast Ohio, about the Intel project and the CHIP Act and so forth in Central Ohio, which is, of course, bipartisan anyway, but given the governor's will on it. But I don't know. I think it's an interesting thing. I think I'm starting to realize late in life that the state's changing so much. I'm not sure I can figure those things out.
Bill?
I don't know how he wins. I sent you the results of his election six years ago, where he carried Mahoney and Trumbull County, and he got a fairly healthy margin to help him win statewide. From that primary vote, I don't see him carrying Mahoney and Trumbull County. I don't see him carrying any county on the eastern border of the state of Ohio, which he probably carried all those, maybe not Columbiana, but in the past he carried all those counties.
Right.
So where does he I mean, it's a question. I don't know. I don't know where he makes up that vote. Certainly everybody points to women in the suburbs, and I think it's pretty clear the abortion issue is an anchor around Republicans. They just lost another race, didn't they? Down in South, it was on the latest.
Alabama.
Yeah. And so that may, Sherrod may that may be a card that he can play that will, and certainly will play, and that might help him. That might save him. But I don't know where geographically you go to get. Well, you get the vote. I suppose you get the votes in the major urban centers, but not in Mahoney and Trumbull County.
Right.
But
Well, a couple of things. Central Ohio and notably Franklin and Licking is becoming a little bit more Democratic, and so is Delaware. And Central Ohio is pretty much the most important vote place in Ohio politically right now. If Northeast Ohio is still more important, it won't be for long, because Central Ohio is growing so fast and it's pretty blue. And somebody alluded to Cincinnati also. Hamilton is now a Democratic county. But so Sherrod's got to make up for that. I have this little obsession with the black vote in Northeast Ohio.
Yes.
Because in 2020, the turnout, I believe I'm right about this, was the low in neighborhoods in Cleveland and East Cleveland, was the lowest in any urban area in the United States. And I know for sure the brown people are aware of that. They're really concerned about it. And you don't have the leadership that you had in this community to change that in the past. People named Stokes and Pinckney, and Forbes to a lesser degree, and Stephanie Tubbs Jones. Now you have some pretty nondescript, powerful people who.
On that point, one of the things I'm sure you're all reading and seeing is this notion that there is some kind of a shift in the black vote. Statistically, I don't know how significant, but a percentage is now going Republican. And so even if you got which is always the idea, the more black votes you got, the better the Democrat candidate would do. You don't know how reliable, or there's a lot of questions about how reliable the black vote is for the Democrats going into this election cycle.
You're absolutely right. There is. And just a shift of a few points, Bill, and it can make a big difference in a statewide election. Sherrod has so many fires to put out in the next 7 months that it's going to be really difficult.
And that raises the point of, Brent, you talked about the past black leaders, Arnold Pinckney, who, had roots in the Mahoning Valley and all of that.
Yes, he did.
They would go into the black communities and explain to black voters what the election actually meant. And as Bill points out, there are black voters who are talking about voting Republican or voting Donald Trump. And I'm wondering why the Democrats are not making the case that, okay, you vote for Donald Trump, and he has already said that if he becomes president, he's going to send troops into the inner cities to deal with the crime area. Who live in the inner cities? These are black people. And so they're going to go after these blacks. And the same thing with the Palestinians. They sat out the primary because they're angry with the Democrats. And as somebody pointed out, okay, so you sit out the election, and guess what? Trump gets in, and there's a Muslim ban that he's going to put in effect immediately. Where is this messaging by Democrats that, that sort of should be resonating with the base? Tom?
Wish I could tell you the answer to that. I think part of it is that I'm not sure that the political parties, especially the Democrats, have really adapted totally to a multi-platform media scene where there are all these different channels of communication, that it was much easier to kind of game things with 3 or 4 networks and several think-type magazines and so forth than there are now. That's number one. Number two, I think that people discount sometimes, foolishly, I think, discount sometimes what Trump says, which I think is a mistake.
Yes.
On things like that, particularly because ethnicity and race and nationality and faith traditions are all conflicting increasingly in America. The irony of it is, of course, that fewer Americans are going to church or going to mosque or temple anyway than they were. But nevertheless, the identity politics of that is still very strong. And so I don't know what to make of that one way or the other. As for African Americans and their perspective, I'm sure a case can be made that, because it can be, that enough has not been done to address some of the structural problems in the black community in the cities by the Congress and by the president. But again, that's a problem. It goes back many, many generations, and I don't know how fast you can expect change to happen anyway. I think we're just in a world of hurt about thinking these things through clearly because of all these conflicting messages people are getting from all these different sources. That's why we have conspiracy theories about things and everything else all over the place about why things happen and why they didn't happen and who's doing what to whom and so forth. So it's like a jumble of shards of glass, not several panes or windows, but shards of glass in a bag and being shaken up all the time with different viewpoints. And I think it just makes for confusion, basically.
Bill?
Well, I already made the point. I think the Republicans' biggest problem, and it's going to be almost everywhere, and that's the abortion issue. And that's going to be, and we saw how important that is in Ohio with the size of the vote, and so that's a big deal. On the side of the Democrats, I don't know how important the Palestinian Muslim vote is in Ohio, but the Democrats and Biden, they're in a tough spot, and they're very the messaging is always confusing because they're trying to play both sides. I mean, the Jewish vote in Israel has always been important at the base of the Democratic Party, a lot of source of financing. On the other hand, you have a lot of young people, as well as the Muslim people who are upset with particularly with the style of the civilian casualty in the war. So they're Biden's in a hard place, and I imagine Sherrod's going to be in a hard place if we're in the same situation in October. And I don't know. It's funny. The Ukrainian situation doesn't matter. It doesn't seem to be matter. Although that's going to be a factor in Parma, I think, for the Republicans. Wouldn't you say?
There was talk 2 years ago about how much it would hurt Vance because Vance.
Yeah, right. He didn't, and he was much clearer on his opposition.
Very much. He's very much an isolationist, and he just doesn't give a shit, and it clearly didn't hurt him.
Yeah,
no.
Which says a lot about the state of Ohio today, politically, and the people who vote in Ohio. Compared to those of us who've been around a long time and have seen the sort of, the way that Ohio is fast becoming, the Mississippi of the North. But on Trump himself, if you recall, when J.D. Vance was running, Trump came to Youngstown and made a big speech, overflowing crowd and all of that, and made the statement, J.D. Vance wants my endorsement, so he's kissing my ass. And Trump said that publicly. Now, I asked Vance about it in that debate, and he said, oh, that was a joke, and he took it as a joke. But it is not a joke. When Donald Trump embraces you, it's not for altruistic reasons or for good politics or whatever. There's a price to be paid, right? Tom?
I think there should be. I'm starting to wonder sometimes if there ever is.
Yeah.
A lot of things that happen. I think that it occurred to me that one of the things that Vance should be considering is that you should use a long spoon when you sup with someone you don't want to get poisoned by. And that brings me back to a vector I wanted to pursue a second ago, which is that when the United States, and you mentioned Ukraine as well as Gaza and so forth, when the United States is seen as having an external threat, such in foreign affairs, that tends to benefit the incumbent, it seems to me, because he or she, in this case has always been he, has been in a position to deal with these things before. But beyond that, I don't know what to say about the situation of people prostrating themselves before this guy and this former president and his antics.
Right.
He belittled Vance, I think, a little again last Saturday night in Dayton, I believe. Didn't he?
I think so.
Made fun of him, and look, J.D. Vance worried to a friend in an email that he worried that Trump was going to become Hitler.
Right.
Marino told people he spent the 2016 convention on his boat in Lake Erie because he didn't want to be on the same soil as Donald Trump.
Right.
And yet here they are today, conscience-free,
yes,
licking his boots.
And yet, the other thing that surprises me is, by any definition, Donald Trump is a snake oil salesman. And so the latest
he's a Bible salesman today. He's a Bible salesman.
The latest thing.
Have you bought one?
He's talking about make America pray again. He doesn't pray. He doesn't go to church as regularly as Biden does. And yet he has embraced that whole notion of, let's all pray. I don't know who the hell he prays to, but why is he able to resonate with this kind of messaging? Bill, since you have been a former insider of the Republican Party, what's going on here with your party?
I don't know. I mean, he's the Pied Piper. In some ways, he has recreated the Republican Party. He's made the Republican Party a much different animal or social movement or whatever than it was under the Bush crowd or at the end of the Bush era, which was a elitist, globalist, conservative on fiscal matters, etc. party. He has come to make it. He has come to take on, as I think Brent pointed out, that all of the grievances of the working class and the people who feel marginalized, mostly who live in the urban or in the rural areas of the country, and he's it's his style, and it's not a real well organized message, but it's very nationalistic and isolationist. Those are some words I can come up with to describe it. He's redefined he's not just redefined the Ohio Republican Party. He's redefined the Republican Party of the United States, and I think probably one of the few things that's holding them back was the court decision on abortion. I think that's the only thing that's holding back from even it being a stronger force in the United States, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, go ahead, Brent. When you talk
I agree. That's a great point, and I've tried to. Nobody's actually Bill described it pretty well. His hold on the voters is because he doesn't care about them.
Yes.
And somehow they believe that all of this stuff he is going through, he's probably been breaking the law for decades, but he's convinced them that now all his legal problems, civil and criminal, are because he has sacrificed for them.
Right.
How can anyone believe a word of that, let alone 74 million people who voted for him?
Tom, how can anyone believe any of that about what Trump spouts?
Well, I think that there's some scholars of communication that have pointed out the real difficulty is that we have a crisis in general in our culture. A crisis of authority, not authority meaning power, you should do this, you should do that, but what you should think and what you should see. And so by the dispersal of communications into many small poles, as opposed to a big unipolar environment, people aren't getting any kind of information they think is reliable. So therefore, what appeals to them the most is what they tend to adopt. It's a bias about belief bias and so forth. That's one thing there. But I want to touch on something that Bill said, which really made struck a chord with me, is that what in one sense Trump has seemed to do, and I'm not being snobbish when I say this, is he's moved the Republican Party from the country club to the shooting range, meaning it's a cultural shift in terms of the kind of the strata socially that people appeal to. People forget that as recently as 1990, early 90s, Democrats were still winning Ohio House seats, regardless of gerrymandering in rural Ohio. Not many seats, but there were some. That's over with now. It's not happening because those people that said they were basically GD Democrats, capital D, were not there anymore because they kind of merged over to the grievance class, which is what I call people that have a good grievance about the world economy right now. And so I think that's really what happened as much as anything. It's a matter of authority crisis. It's who shouts the largest, and that's the loudest and largest about various things. And the governor or the president, former president, is very good at that by insisting on certain simple themes that are basically resonate with people that make everyone think he's going to do what he says he's going to do, which in many ways he can't do anyway, but he's going to try.
Right.
Mhm.
So, gentlemen, as the campaign unfolds, leading up to November, it's too early to even speculate as to what the outcome is going to be, but how do you see the campaign shaping up, or what can we expect as far as, first of all, is the Sherrod Brown race crucial to the National Democratic Party and also to the Senate? And if so, what role do you see the party playing? And on the Republican side, is it enough for Marino just to go into hiding? Bill remembers this when Hannah used to have a certain candidate running, and they didn't want that candidate to be shown. He'd send him to Florida and just do a campaign without the candidate being present. So give me a sense as what we can watch in the next several months. Brent, let me start with you.
It'll probably be the ugliest race in Ohio. It will be an ugly race. It will be. I was running the numbers a few hours ago with someone who's involved in the Sherrod campaign. The Ryan Vance race, I believe, was about $150 million race.
Okay.
And if you think back, it wasn't that long ago, they were on TV in the last month or so constantly, right? Nonstop. This race will be a minimum of a $400 million race. And in the last month of the campaign, the candidates will be spending $1 million a day on TV, because this could be the race that determines who controls the Senate.
Right.
It's a fairly expensive state to advertise in, fairly, because there's so many different television markets. There's one in West Virginia, or two, at least one, and it will not be a pretty race. It will not be a pretty sight, and it's too early to say where it's headed, but it's headed south in terms of its stability.
Yeah.
Bill?
Well, I think he's right. I think it's going to be a very dirty race, and a very expensive and a very expensive race, and there'll be no whole lot, especially with the current federal laws on campaign contributions. There can be every special interest group in the country will have ads on for or against both of them.
Right.
So it's going to be hell of a race. I wish I owned a TV station, Bertram, in Ohio.
Yes, I know you would. Tom, the word civility had some meaning in politics in the bygone era, but it no longer does it?
No, in an era of being boisterous and crude and brash is seen as somehow being brave, which isn't really the case at all. Being brave is being, I think, civil and being mannerly, but that's just it. So there's a coarsening in society in general, frankly, I think, which makes a lot of what people say in politics today more acceptable than would have been even 10 years ago. And that's going to make for some really outrageous stump speeches in Ohio in the next few months, I think, especially after Labor Day.
Right. Well, gentlemen, thank you again. We will be in touch. We'll continue this conversation. Appreciate your time. And Brent, all the best with your
Thanks, Bertram. Appreciate it.
with your family.
Yeah, likewise.
I hope everything works out. And again, great insight, and we'll keep watching. Thank you again.
Okay.